Zulfi Bhutto of Pakistan, His Life and Times by Stanley Wolpert. Chapter 1. Sindhi Roots, pre-1928. No individual in the history of Pakistan achieved greater popular power or suffered so ignominious a death as Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, 1928 to 1979. Zulfi Bhutto's political rise and fall were, indeed, so meteoric as to make his name a legend in the land over which he presided for a little more than half a decade prior to his hanging. A full decade after his death, Bhutto remained popular enough to ensure the election of his daughter, Benazir, to the premier position he once held. Wherever she campaigned in Sindh and much of Punjab, the popular roar that greeted her was Jiye Bhutto, Bhutto lives, by which millions of Pakistanis meant and still mean Zulfi Bhutto. Zulfi Bhutto roused such diametrically opposed passions and has left such divergent images among his disciples and adversaries that it remains virtually impossible to reconcile them as reflections of any single personality. Much like the nation he led, and in many ways came to epitomize, born irreconcilably divided, partitioned into East and West, torn from the subcontinental fabric of Mother India by the Islamic faith of his fathers. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, microcosmic reflection of Pakistan, was never a simple personality. His unique charisma and the deep-rooted failings that brought him to an early and violent death emanated from his schizoid personality, the strengths of one part of which were matched by weaknesses of the other, the depths of its dreadful darkness mirroring the brilliant heights of its most powerful peaks. Torn apart by his inner conflicts, never able to reconcile his romantic dreams of glory with the mundane realities and misery so prevalent all around him, Zulfi hoped to the bitter end of his brief but flamboyant sojourn at the top of Pakistan's slippery pole to save himself and his land from a destiny of diminution, death, and fragmentation, vaingloriously viewing himself as an Islamic Napoleon, the Shah of Pakistan. For over a year and a half, I have been kept in solitary confinement, Zulfi wrote from his acrid death cell in Rawalpindi's now demolished prison that bitterly cold January of 1979. My family has owned not thousands of acres of land but hundreds of thousands for generations. My genesis to political fame is written in the stars. If I am not a part of Pakistan, Sindh is not a part of Pakistan. My roots in the soil of this land are very deep. So, it is in the subsoil of Sindh we must search for Zulfi's roots, in the shifting, treacherous sands of that ancient southernmost province of Pakistan. Sindh means river, named for its Indus lifeline. The Bhuttos migrated to Sindh in search of water, leaving their parched Rajputana desert homes farther east in what is now India's Rajasthan, near the dawn of the 18th century. Zulfi's paternal ancestors had before his clan's long trek been Hindu Rajputs, but during the 17th century, Central Asia's great Mughals conquered virtually all of India, and many Rajput warriors, like Zulfi's progenitor, Shetto, converted to Islam, reaping a harvest of tax exemptions and other benefits from the devout Mughal Padishah, Emperor Aurangzeb, and his Muslim emirs, and claiming for himself as clan leader the regal title of Khan. Thus, as far back as history traces them, Bhuttos have been adroit at seizing whatever opportunities life offered, equally ready to move on or change their faith if they deemed it expedient for the survival's sake, determined to overcome drought, famine, or the fiercest of adversaries in struggling to advance themselves and the fortunes of their clever family. Shetto Khan found the fertile land he sought in Sindh's Ratodero, just a few miles north of Larkana, and the rural town in which Zulfi would be born 2 centuries later. In the Fecund watershed of the Indus River, the silt round Ratodero and Larkana proved rich enough to raise as much rice and sugarcane as all the Bhuttos could eat, and cotton enough to clothe that fast-growing clan as well. Though unknown to Sheto Khan, less than 10 miles south of Larkana was the still undiscovered site of one of the world's greatest ancient cities, Mohenjo-daro. The untilled growth and woods round Ratodero and Larkana were full of game, especially wild boar, which Bhutto men always enjoyed hunting. Hunting would, in fact, become Zulfi's favorite sport, and though he was considered only a fair shot for almost 2 decades, whenever he was in Sindh, he annually hosted a regal hunt at Larkana to celebrate his birthday. Zulfi probably had the best and the largest private collection of hunting rifles and ammunition in Pakistan, and his guests would include the Sheikh of Abu Dhabi and the Shah of Iran, as well as Pakistan's President Ayub Khan and Yahya Khan. Mughal governors ruled Sindh from its bustling port city of Thatta, some 50 miles east of Karachi, which had attracted English merchants early in the 17th century by reports that it was as big as London, with then close to 250,000 population, and that its port filled with ships laden with every kind of merchandise which arrived by passing down the Navigable Indo River, whose bank it stands, a most wealthy and most vicious spot. The breakdown of Mughal power soon after the death of Aurangzeb in the early 18th century left Thatta and Sindh in the hands of the Marshal Kalhoras, under whose rule British East India merchants established their first factory in 1758. Sheto's great-grandson, Pir Bakhsh Khan Bhutto, fought and defeated the Arbos, a tribe related to the Kalhoras by marriage, in many battles in Larkana, where he established Bhutto power. Before the end of that century of violent conflicts and rapid change, however, the Kalhoras themselves were defeated by fiercer Balochi invaders, the Amirs of Talpur, who took control of Sindh, moving their capital almost 100 miles north along the Indus to Hyderabad. Vadero Pir Bakhsh Khan swore allegiance to the new Talpur rulers of Sindh and was confirmed in return over his vast tracts of Bhutto land around Larkana, Sakhar and Khairpur. In 1821, however, Vadero Pir Bakhsh was invited by His Highness Mir Ali Murad Talpur to send his eldest son, Ali Bakhsh Khan Bhutto, to Khairpur, where he was kept as an honorable hostage at the Talpur court for 5 years to ensure that my family did not revolt. The British had been forced to abandon their first factory in Thatta less than 2 decades after opening it, and tried without initial success to negotiate a new commercial treaty with the Talpurs. East India Company servants continued, nevertheless, to seek fresh footholds in the region that had once proved profitable, and soon after 1830, British ships sailed up the Indus to Hyderabad, eliciting the prescient prophecy from observant Sindhis that our land is lost now that the British have navigated our river. With the more powerful and ever-threatening Punjab kingdom of Sikh Maharaja Ranjit Singh to its north, Sindh's Amir first hoped to ally themselves with the British Company in order to keep the one-eyed Lion of Punjab at bay. In April 1938, Colonel Henry Pottinger concluded a treaty with the Talpur Amirs, which permitted a British minister and his escort of troops to reside in Hyderabad. 2 months later, the British concluded their infamous tripartite treaty with Ranjit Singh and the exiled former Amir of Afghanistan, Shah Shuja, who had lived as a pensioner of the British in Ludhiana and was to serve as the company's puppet prince on the throne of Kabul after he was returned to it by a mighty British army that invaded Afghanistan in 1839. That doomed army of the Indus would moreover invade through Sindh, and Sindh's amirs were expected to pay all military bills as part of the debt Shah Shuja claimed from them, which the British company was pleased to support, despite repeated Talpur disclaimers. Sindh was thus used as the launching pad for the tragic First Anglo-Afghan War. Sir Charles Napier led the brutal conquest of Sindh in September of 1842. Three Talpur amirs had divided their kingdom. The major portion ruled from Hyderabad, the others farther north from Khairpur and Miani. Those armies joined forces in a last desperate stand against the British invasion at Miani, the Talpur's Waterloo, in March 1843, when 10,000 Sindhis were slaughtered. Napier established his court in Karachi, then just a tiny port on the Arabian Sea, where he remained as the company's first governor. He was honest enough to confess to his own diary, "We have no right to seize Sindh, yet we shall do so, and a very advantageous piece of rascality it will be." Napier personally reaped some 70,000 pounds in Sindhi plunder. His most famous subordinate was a brilliant young canal department servant named Richard Burton, who wrote two Cogent volumes on Snide, the Unhappy Valley, which would be published soon after he returned to London in 1851. Pir Bakhsh's son, Dodo Khan Bhutto, ruled the clan during Napier's overlordship of Sindh, and he was indeed appointed by Napier's lieutenant as the sole arbitrator to give an award on the boundaries of the Chandio Jangir. His liberality to the Chandios would long win their support for all Bhuttos. His hot-blooded grandson, Mir Ghulam Murtaza Bhutto, Zulfi's grandfather, fell in love with the beautiful Sindhi mistress of Larkana's British collector magistrate, Colonel Mayhew. Colonel Mayhew was then an old man over 60. Handsome Mir Murtaza, of course, was much closer in age to the young Sher beauty, which soon reciprocated his love. The wily old colonel suspected the affair and laid a trap to catch the sinners. Zulfi's father recalled. The colonel pretended to leave on tour, letting word of his departure reach Larkana from his Sakhar residence, luring Mir Murtaza as fast as his horse could gallop to the Sher mistress's bed. The colonel returned that same night to catch the naked lovers, lashing out at Mir Murtaza with his horsewhip. Young Bhutto managed to grab the whip, however, knocking the old man to the floor and giving him a few lashes before fleeing with his young love, depositing her with her parents near Napierabad, then galloping home. That was early in 1892. Zulfi's father, Shah Nawaz Bhutto, was only 4, but the passionate feud that started between his father and the British colonel evolved into a vendetta, whose memory and impact affected his entire life, teaching him much about politics, especially in Sindh, and how to behave with the British, who would one day knight him, yet never win more than outward displays of his loyalty. Sir Shah Nawaz reported how the colonel had been careful to keep secret the unpleasant incident with his father, noting that an administrative officer he could have lost his position if the scandal leaked out. But he never forgot such an insult, patiently waiting almost a year to take revenge. Then, according to Shah Nawaz, a Sindh police inspector, Sher Mohammad Shah, was almost murdered by his enemies in a village near Larkana. Mayhew promised Inspector Shah promotion and property if he would assert that he was attacked by Mir Murtaza, which he did. The sessions judge acquitted Mr. Mir Murtaza. However, though his defense proved very expensive. A year later, the colonel tried again, this time securing eyewitnesses to charge young Bhutto with the murder of a Hindu. Now, the legal fees were much higher, for the two British barristers were engaged, a Mr. Anverty of Bombay at rupees 1,000 a day and a Mr. Rottingin of Lahore, who charged rupees 1,500. The trial was long, but the barristers earned their high pay, winning acquittal. Still, the vendetta continued, and the colonel won a retrial motion he filed in Bombay. Mr. Murtaza's father had no more funds to waste in court and advised his hot-blooded son to flee. The young man disappeared, first to Bahawalpur state, where his British nemesis discovered him, then to Kabul, where no British officers could follow. Zulfi and his own elder son, Mir Murtaza's namesake, would both inherit that first Mir Murtaza Bhutto's fiery nature. In her autobiography, Zulfi's oldest child, Benazir, recalls how her father loved to recount that particular family story to his children. But Zulfi's version was significantly different from that which his father had preserved and passed down to him, reflecting perhaps his own passions and pride, as well as some personal experiences he had in California, London, and Karachi. Zulfi amended the tale, insisting that all women in Sindh were in love with him, Mir Murtaza, including a young British woman. In those days, it was haram, forbidden to marry a foreigner, but he couldn't prevent her feelings for him. Zulfi's version then had the colonel send for his great-grandfather and try to lash him because of his brown skin for daring to encourage the affections of a British woman. Mir Murtaza, however, seized the whip and lashed the colonel and then fled with British cavalry in hot pursuit. They almost caught up to the British woman who loved Bhutto too much to live without him. So instead of leaving her to face dishonor, Mir Murtaza ordered his own retinue to kill her, then galloped on alone into Afghan exile. I loved hearing those family stories, Benazir would write, unaware of the amendments in family lore made by her ardently imaginative father, who inspired his children to form our own moral code, just as my father had intended: loyalty, honor, principle. For Zulfi's father, Mir Murtaza's young son, the fierce vendetta that forced his father into prolonged exile proved equally instructive, initiating him into the domain of politics, as he called it, at a remarkably precocious age. In those feudal times, the politics of our environment were essentially personal and tribal, wrote Sir Shah Nawaz, adding with unfortunate accuracy that the weaknesses of the system long continued to hold sway over Pakistan. In the Sindhi language, the word for politics is siyasat, an ancient term derived from the feudal code of honor, whose most important attributes were loyalty and vengeance. Our feudal environment draws us to siyasat from the cradle to the grave, noted Shah Nawaz, concluded with the melancholy reflection that it covers the whole spectrum of our backward society. Mumtaz Ali Bhutto, Zulfi's uncle, who was more like a brother to him and his closest male confidant, recently reflected that Zulfi was a born politician. I think there was no blood in his veins, it was all politics. Benazir's mother, Begum Nusrat Bhutto, said that her elder daughter, then the Prime Minister of Pakistan, was just like her father in so many ways. Mir Murtaza's Afghan exile left his father, Khudabakhsh Khan, to bear the brunt of the colonel's anti-Bhuttoism. His grandson wrote that Colonel Mayhew's police induced criminals to ambush Khudabakhsh one evening as he was returning home after inspecting some of his distant property in Jacobabad district. The highway robbers hurled a hatchet at the old man's horse, sending the wounded animal off at so swift a gallop that he threw Khudabakhsh from his saddle. And though Bhutto Haris, peasant serf, found their Vadero, land baron, lying unconscious in the field, and carried him to what was then the main village of the Bhutto Haris, Amirabad. Khudabakhsh never recovered. 2 weeks after the old Khan's death, since his only son and heir was an absconder, Colonel Mayhew confiscated all the movable Bhutto properties, including invaluable jewels, heirlooms, and gold embossed saddles and guns, ordering kerosene poured over the guest houses and godowns to set fire to the furniture, carpets, and durries. We saw the fire ablaze at night, Shah Nawaz recalled. In the morning, we saw the ashes. That was 1896, when 8-year-old Shah Nawaz and his aged grandmother, mother, and brother were forced by the superintendent of the police to leave their once luxurious home in Gadi Khudabakhsh, Bhutto village of Sindh's Ratodero Taluka, with only the clothes on our bodies. They took shelter with their poor haris, and for the first time in his life, Shah Nawaz was obliged to walk barefoot in Sindh's blazing heat some 10 miles a day to the vernacular school at Nodero, taking his crust of dry bread along for lunch. He, who had always been served on silver plates. When Mir Murtaza learned of his father's death and its tragic aftermath, he appealed to Kabul's Iron Amir, Abdurrahman Khan in Kabul, for help to reclaim his confiscated fortune. The Afghan Amir provided the young Bhutto Khan with sufficient funds not only to return to Sindh but to enable him to fight out his case in court. But Mir Murtaza lost all his Afghan gold when the boat he had hired to take him from Peshawar to Karachi capsized in a storm at Panjnad. Ever resourceful, he managed to borrow more money from an official in Bahawalpur state, where he was well known, and so completed his journey to Karachi. Once he reached Karachi, Mir Murtaza disguised himself as a Sikh labourer to avoid detection by the colonel's police, and then went to visit his friend and former pleader, Rais Ghulam Muhammad Shedi. The Rais first refused to believe his eyes. Such was the perfection of Mir Murtaza's disguise. But once he heard the poor labourer's voice and several of the names he swiftly dropped, he recognized it was Bhutto Sahib himself. These two wealthy Sindhis then put their heads together till they figured out how best to get Bhutto inside the carefully guarded residence of the British Commissioner of Sindh, Karachi's high official, so that Mir Murtaza might personally plead his case, without running any risk of having it shot down in advance by the Colonel Mayhew himself. They knew better than to attempt a direct approach to the Commissioner's James's office, for that gate was guarded by the Commissioner's Mir Mushi, head clerk, who not only required much consideration but would at best end in sending Mir Murtaza to the Commissioner's political assistant, a young Englishman who would probably never agree to waste any of the Commissioner's precious time on so questionable a matter. The plan they devised was worthy of a tale from the Arabian Nights and most instructive as to how important meetings have long been arranged in Karachi and Sindh. Rais Ghulam Muhammad knew the Mir Munshi well enough to appeal to him to permit the poor Sikh labourer from the north to get employment on a construction job that was going on in the Commissioner's residence. Police clearance was, of course, required for all such jobs, but the Rais assured his friend that this labourer was hard-working, and because it was only one job, there was no problem. So Mir Murtaza was smuggled into the house of the most powerful Englishman in Sindh, disguised as a poor worker. But the wily Bhutto Khan and his clever pleader carried their conspiratorial Real plot much further, the Rais, having secured the list of guards to learn that one of the commissioner's many chowkidars, gatekeeper guards, was a Sindhi khokhar from Larkana. Once Mir Murtaza got inside the great house, therefore, he had a natural ally, and from this Larkana informant learned that the commissioner came out to inspect the progress of the construction twice weekly, and on Saturdays invariably spoke to the labourers and the foreman. The following Saturday morning, as the commissioner, Sir Evan James, made his rounds of construction, Mir Murtaza stepped forward to announce his true identity, boldly pleading, "I have a story to tell you and I want you to do justice by hearing me." Sir Evan did not show surprise or anger, only stared more closely at this strange man before turning him over to his aide-de-camp to take into custody. The aide listened to Bhutto's story and reported what he had learned to the commissioner, who had by now heard of the notorious vendetta between Mayhew and Mir Murtaza, and probably even knew about the lovely mistress they had shared. So he had Mir Murtaza brought to him and found him reasonable and courteous, as he pleaded for a fair trial before the commissioner's own court in Karachi rather than under Mayhew's jurisdiction in Sakhar. That seemed just enough to Sir Evan, who immediately dictated an order of transfer and shook Mir Murtaza's hand before he left, sagely advising him to leave his office without bitterness. More than a quarter century later, when Sir Shahnawaz himself became a minister in the government of Bombay, he looked up Sir Evan James's reports and took note of one the wise old commissioner had written about the great influence of the Bhuttos, ending with a warning, "They have to be watched." After producing two sureties and raising bail, Mir Murtaza was released, his Karachi pleaders seeing to the transfer of all trial documents from Sakhar to the commissioner's court. Free though he was to move about Karachi, Mir Murtaza could not leave that city till his trial, another lengthy one, in which he was defended by barrister Moti Ram Advani, ended in his vindication. All the confiscated Bhutto property was now to be restored to Mir Murtaza. It was 1899, the year the Black Plague first reached Karachi from China via Bombay. Mir Murtaza swiftly left that city of death, galloping north to Sehwan to give thanks at the shrine of Sindh's greatest Sufi, Saint Lal Shahbaz, Red Falcon, Kalandar, who first came to Sindh in the 14th century and whose shrine at Sehwan, 30 miles south of Larkana, would often be visited by Zulfi for worship as well as by his mother and grandfather. Mir Murtaza stayed with his good friend Ali Muhammad, son of Khan Bahadur Hassan Ali Afandi Majidi, who was posted by the British in Dadu, just north of Sehwan, as civil judge, and who gave him happy news of Colonel Mayhew's imminent retirement. Bhutto's old adversary was, in fact, just then on his way down from Sakhar to Karachi for his last voyage home. They met in Dadu at the Afandi's house, and Mir Murtaza asked the colonel to expedite restoration of all his immovable properties, including his houses in Larkana. The old colonel, who said he still loved Sindh and her people, agreed to let bygones be bygones and signed the order prepared in the civil judge's house to restore all such properties. With that powerful document in his hand, Mir Murtaza returned to Larkana to a royal welcome. There were celebrations all over Ratodero, Shahnawaz recalled. From the village of Ghadi Khudabakhsh Bhutto to town of Ratodero, people lined both sides of the road. Bright carpets spread at every intersection, accompanied by 3 faithful servants who had remained with him throughout his arduous exile. Mir Murtaza Khan Bhutto rode on horseback to be feted at the grandest reception ever held in that district. He publicly assured everybody that he had harbored no grievances towards anyone who had given evidence against him and thanked them for all such heartwarming hospitality. There was, he said, no greater happiness than to return to the land of birth and burial and to be with one's children, with one's friends and people. It was the high point of his short, turbulent life. 1 month later, Mir Murtaza was poisoned to death by the machinations of some influential zamindars, his son suspected, who had falsely deposed against my father to please Colonel Mayhew and now feared the hot-blooded Bhutto Khan's revenge siyasat. Shah Nawaz, though only 10 at the time, was a full day older than his half-brother, Ali Gauhar Khan, and thus found himself suddenly in charge of the family and the state. Those same influential landlords of the district who had conspired to murder his father were, of course, jealous of Shah Nawaz and hatched what he called dangerous intrigues against him and his younger brother. The new British collector, Mr. Mules, took personal care and responsibility for protecting the boys, however, under his coat of wards, while their great-uncle, Vadero Elahi Bakhsh Khan Bhutto, Mumtaz Ali's grandfather, took charge of the management of their estate, fortune and family until they reached maturity. Young Shah Nawaz had fond memories of his good guardian, Mr. Mules, and his assistant collector, Mr. Tarapat, who founded a very good middle school in Larkana, modelled after the excellent Chiefs College of Lahore, with English curricula designed to prepare the children of the local gentry for higher education in Bombay or London, if not Oxford or Cambridge. The boys were encouraged to take up boating, for prosperous, fast-growing Larkana, with its ample mango gardens and orchards, had been built on the banks of the huge Gharwa Canal and was by then commonly called the Garden of Sindh. Shah Nawaz and his friends often played along the banks of the canal after school, and though he had not learned how to swim, decided one hot afternoon to take a dip. He suddenly found himself carried away by the swift currents into the deep center of the wide canal. Luckily, his friends' cries roused several nearby fishermen who jumped in to save him. He had lost consciousness in the canal, waking up much later in a hospital. For many years, he did not dare to enter water again.